Okay, so lesson 2 of our introductory unit, it's a little bit misleading because it talks about, the title of it is American Government, and we will be talking about government in America, but we also will be talking about the different types of governments uh, in other places around the world. And so just one little caveat here, we are sort of iced in today, and so if you hear my children hollering in the background, don't pay too much attention to them. They're 1 and 3, and they've got a little bit of cabin fever. So just sort of ignore them. My long-suffering wife is dealing with them at this point. But anyway, so I digress. But back to our lesson 2, dealing with not only the government in the United States, but comparing it to other forms of government. So if we look at our course learning objective, it says identify the types of government in America and compare it to other forms of government. And this is going to correlate with our departmental learning objective, which says demonstrate knowledge of the federal system, because as we identify the type of government in America, it's going to build upon our knowledge of the federal system here in the United States. And so by the end of this lesson, you should be able to answer the following questions. What type of government is found in America? And number 2, what are the different types of governments found in the world? So let us begin. So, government in America. If you recall from our last lecture, our last lesson, government is the means by which a society organizes itself, allocates authority, and provides benefits to the society as a whole. And so the best explanation of a government in the United States is a representative democracy. Because in a representative democracy, citizens elect individuals to make decisions and pass laws on their behalf. And so as citizens who participate in the electoral process, we elect a ton of different people. We elect members of Congress, we elect the president and the vice president, albeit indirectly. We elect members of state legislatures, we elect governors and mayors, and we elect town councils and school boards. And this is all very important. All of these people play a role in, how our life and a lot of the times our financial situation plays out. And the closer it gets to you, the more impact it's probably going to have. And so it's important to understand that even though they're not very sexy, these elections for school board and town councils and mayors, those are very important. Probably more important than, when we elect a president. But that's for another lesson. Most representative democracies in the world are going to favor what is known as majority rule, which is the opinions of the majority of the people have more influence with the government than those in the minority. And so, we take a vote if we sort of count out the Electoral College. In most elections, when the majority votes for a person, that person is elected, right? And so they're going to go and represent us in whatever part of government we've elected them to, and they are sort of going to represent the majority of the people's ideas. However, in a representative government, we do have a minority group, and I'm not talking about a racial minority group in this lesson, but we do have a minority group, a group of people who essentially did not win excuse me, who did not win the election. And so one of the hallmarks of a representative government is that we protect those minority rights. So even if the overwhelming number of people think that something should be done a certain way, we cannot deprive the people that disagree with them of certain rights. Right? And so I think your textbook, your online textbook, uses an example of atheism in America. Something like 7% perhaps, and I'm just using these numbers off the top of my head from what I can remember, of Americans are atheists. And so even though the majority of Americans participate in some type of government, We cannot deprive atheists from being atheist just because they're a small minority, right? Their their right to believe the way they want to believe is enshrined in the First Amendment. And so, even though most of the society would believe in, a god or a type of religion, we cannot strip these people who don't believe with the majority of certain rights just because they don't think like everybody else. And so, in a um, representative democracy, we do protect the minority rights of individuals. Okay. So in America, it says in American, but it should say in America, the Constitution provides a safety net for protection of minority rights. That is what makes America both a democracy and a republic, right? Excuse me. In a democracy, majority does rule, but there's really no protection of those minority rights. And so this becomes more of a mob rule. If we were to quote, I believe, if we were quoting Plato, he was very hesitant to buy into the idea of a democracy because of a mob rule. There was no protection really of these minorities' rights. But because we do protect our minority rights, and there are going to be some checks on the laws and what people can do to individuals. We are a republic. We have a constitution that sort of outlines what the government can and cannot do. And so we are going to protect those minorities. Now, if we shift gears a little bit, then so we know we have a representative democracy that's kind of an amalgamation or a hybrid of democracy and a republic. Let's look at the different types of governments around the world. First of all, there are things known as a direct democracy. And this is when people participate directly in making government decisions. And democracy is going to be born in ancient Athens a lot of years ago, back during ancient times. And in ancient Athens, all male citizens had the right to attend meetings of the assembly, and there they would debate issues that were facing the city-state, and they could participate in voting on, how to deal with those issues that face the city-state. And so instead of just electing certain people to go and do this for them, as we do in the United States, they would go directly, into participating in the democracy and taking part of this debate themselves. The U.S. federal and state governments are not direct democracies. We are representative democracies. But you can still see some form of direct democracy exist in the United States, right? When we vote on propositions or laws on the ballot, we are participating in direct democracy. So when we go to the polls and there's proposition whatever that seeks to establish something, create something, get rid of something, or there's a law on the ballot that the voters are supposed to decide on. This is an element of direct democracy because we're not necessarily having someone make this decision for us. We are going and voting either yes or no, and so we're participating in this direct democracy. New England still has town hall meetings where all the residents are allowed to debate decisions affecting the town. So they come together in a big hall, however many times a year. Excuse me again. And they debate the decisions that affect the town. And so they do still participate in some form of this direct democracy. And you will see direct democracy still be practiced on some level in other places as well, places like Switzerland. But by and large, it is not the most common form of democracy. Representative democracy is the most common form. So if we get out of democracies, which imply that the citizenry are the ones that hold power, and we start looking at elite driven forms of government, which we began mentioning in our last lesson, we can start to look at some of the other types of governments that are significantly different from ours. And we have monarchies, and there are a bunch of different types of monarchies. The monarchies that we're talking about here are the absolute monarchies, the one ruler, that are usually hereditary, that hold political power, right? And while they're not as common as they once were, you can still see these types of monarchies in Southwest Asian kingdoms. They typically exercise absolute rule. It is not in conjunction with any elected body. It's unrestricted rule, unrestricted power. And you're going to see these things in Saudi Arabia and Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. And so if you look at something in the media today, in recent months, the killing of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi, it looks as if the Saudi crown prince was the one who ordered that killing, and whereas in the United States that wouldn't stand up because the people wouldn't allow it. In Saudi Arabia, the monarchy is the one ruler, and it is that crown prince, um, Mohammed bin Salman, I believe, MBS, who is in charge of the government, and there's really nobody that sort of checks his power. So there are still some very absolute types of monarchies. There's also some constitutional style monarchies that mix a monarchy with a democratic element that you would see in Great Britain and in places like Norway and anyway. So the most unrestricted type of monarchy you're going to see in a lot of Southwest Asian kingdoms. We talked about oligarchies a little bit in the last lecture, but if you recall, an oligarchy is a type of government that is handled by a smaller group of elite individuals. And we talked a little bit about China being one of these oligarchies, but you also can count Cuba in that as well, because a very small group of individuals are going to be allowed to exercise power within Cuba, and especially since the 1960s, with the Castro family sort of taking on that realm. And then again, China, very elite-driven type of government. And then we have what are known as totalitarian governments, or totalitarianism. And this is where the government is more important than the people and controls every aspect of the lives of the people. So in a totalitarian type of government, rights are extremely limited. There's no participation in the political process. There's really no opposition that can occur, because it's going to be squashed by whoever is in power. Typically, these are going to be rare in modern day, but if we look at North Korea, they are going to be a totalitarian type of government, because the leader Kim Jong Un is an individual who significantly limits the rights of his people, and gets rid of anybody who opposes his ideas. And so, also another type of an elite-driven form of government. All right. So this sort of takes us back to our objectives, and so after reading the correlating assigned reading and listening to this lecture, you should be able to answer what type of government is found in America and what are the different types of governments in the world. And so I will wrap this up here, and I'll see you in lesson 3.